The sun beat down fiercely on Syphor, a planet with an unforgiving landscape that mirrored the brutal training academy that spanned its vast deserts and jagged mountain peaks. Syphor Academy was known for one thing above all else: its final exam had a 90% death rate. A truth that haunted every cadet and made survival an almost insurmountable challenge. To even make it through the grueling selection process was a feat of pure willpower, and many didn't get past the first week. Juno Skye stood at the edge of the high cliffs, her boots digging into the rocky surface. The wind was dry, whipping across her face as the murmurs of the other cadets buzzed in the background. Today was the day, the beginning of the final exam. "This is it, huh?" she muttered under her breath, eyes scanning the vast, inhospitable terrain ahead. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She wasn't here to back down. She was here to prove something. Something to the galaxy. Something to herself. "You're the human," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Juno turned, finding a tall, bony Syphorian cadet eyeing her with disdain. His skin was an ashen gray, his eyes cold, calculating. His name was Xyril Orson, and he was everything she had heard about Syphorians: brutal, efficient, and completely incapable of understanding the concept of teamwork. "That's me," she answered, her voice steady despite the tension building in her gut. She had been warned about him, Xyril, the star student, the one who excelled in every brutal test, every simulation, and was sure he'd emerge victorious in this one too. "Got a problem with it?" Xyril's lips curled into a thin, smug smile. "The problem," he said slowly, "is that you're human. You don't belong here." Juno's fingers tightened around the strap of her rifle. The last thing she needed right now was a challenge from him. She didn't respond. He was looking for a fight, but she refused to indulge him. The academy had made it clear that the final exam was a test of survival, not petty feuds. Yet, that didn't stop cadets like Xyril from making it personal. "Time to move out," the voice of the academy's commanding officer blasted through the comms, cutting through the tension. "Cadets, the final exam begins now. You will be sent into the wilderness, where you will face trials of strength, survival, and tactical skill. Only those who adapt will survive. The rest will be eliminated." Juno couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine. The warning wasn't a simple statement, it was a fact. A promise. The 90% mortality rate wasn't a scare tactic. It was reality. She glanced at her surroundings: the jagged cliffs, the treacherous terrain ahead, the cadets milling around in tense groups, each one sizing up the others. It was kill or be killed. And Juno had no intention of being the one who fell. As she joined the group being led to their designated drop zone, she caught sight of Xyril again, moving with the confidence of someone who had already won. He had no idea what it meant to fight as a team, to rely on others. To trust. Juno, on the other hand, knew that if she wanted to make it through, she needed to rely on every ounce of human ingenuity and camaraderie she could muster. She couldn't win this on her own. The drop zone was located at the base of a craggy mountain range, and the cadets were forced into teams immediately. The academy's rules were clear: no one survived alone. Despite the individualistic culture of Syphor, survival meant working together, something Juno intended to leverage, no matter how hard her fellow cadets resisted it. "Pick your team," the officer barked as the groups were divided. Juno's eyes scanned the field. Most of the cadets, already paired with their respective comrades, shot her quick, dismissive glances. No one wanted the human on their team. But Juno wasn't looking for a fight, she was looking for a way to survive. She saw a small group of cadets standing near the edge of the drop zone, looking uncertain. A mix of species, a tall Tlan, an amphibious Isha, and a small, wiry Fkhan. The last two had their heads down, clearly nervous. Juno approached them with a determined step. "You need a team?" she asked, her voice low but direct. "I do." The Tlan, a creature with tough, dark green skin and elongated limbs, raised an eyebrow. "A human?" he asked, the skepticism evident in his tone. "I'm not here to lose," Juno replied. "You'll need someone who can think on their feet." "That's me." The Isha, with webbed hands and big, dark eyes, looked uncertain but said nothing. The Fkhan, a scrawny but quick-moving species, nodded silently. They weren't convinced, but they weren't rejecting her either. Fine, the Tlon said after a moment of hesitation. But we don't babysit. Agreed, Juno replied quickly. I'm here to fight. The officer's voice came through the comms once again. You have 1 hour before the trial begins. Make sure your gear is ready. Juno didn't waste any time. She gathered her equipment quickly, checking her energy packs, ensuring her rifle was in working condition, and securing her survival kit. It was a brutal test ahead, but she would face it head-on, as one. Together. As she finished preparing, she couldn't shake the feeling that Xeril was watching her from across the field. His eyes locked onto hers, burning with disdain. She would be his competition, and he would make sure she failed. But she had something he didn't, a belief in the strength of unity. The timer for the final exam began counting down, and the field fell silent. Each cadet was left with their thoughts, the reality of the situation sinking in. A test of survival. Only the strongest would prevail. But Juno had never been one to back down from a challenge, and if she could find a way to work with her team, to rely on their strengths, maybe, just maybe, she could prove that humanity's greatest strength lay not in dominance, but in unity. Let's make it through, Juno muttered, the words carrying the weight of everything she stood for. Together. The exam had begun. The first challenge arrived sooner than expected, and it came with no warning. Juno's heart raced as she led her new team through the rugged terrain. The cliffs loomed around them, and the distant roars of alien creatures echoed in the valley below. Her eyes darted over the jagged rocks, every sense on high alert. The final exam wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a countdown to death for those who faltered. Stay close, Juno ordered, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. We don't know what's out there. The Tlon, whose name was Sren, nodded but said nothing. The Isha, named Kova, was visibly uneasy, adjusting his webbed gloves as he scanned their surroundings. The Fkhan, named Zek, moved silently behind, his small frame agile as he maneuvered between boulders, eyes darting with nervous energy. For the past 30 minutes, Juno had kept her team moving cautiously, sticking to cover and moving fast. Syphor's terrain was unforgiving, sharp rocks and thick vegetation made every step a challenge. The air was thin and dry, sapping their energy with every breath. There's no time for hesitation, Juno muttered under her breath. She was already feeling the pressure of the clock ticking down. This first part of the exam would be the easiest, but Juno knew the worst was yet to come. They had to survive until the next checkpoint, an isolated ridge where they would receive further instructions. Only then could they rest. Suddenly, Zek stopped, his small form tensing. Movement, he whispered, his voice barely audible. His sharp eyes locked onto a dark figure moving through the trees ahead. Juno held up a hand, signaling for silence. She crouched low, scanning the area through the scope of her rifle. Her team fell into position, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination. A shadow darted between the trees, quick, too quick. Juno's pulse quickened. It's not a cadet, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. This was something else, something dangerous. She tightened her grip on her rifle and silently motioned for the team to follow her lead. Without warning, a creature lunged from the underbrush, a massive, four-legged predator, its scales glistening like obsidian under the weak sun. Its eyes burned bright red, and its maw dripped with saliva as it snarled, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Get ready! Juno barked. Move! The predator pounced toward them, faster than anything Juno had ever seen. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of a human, with sleek, muscular limbs built for speed. Before Juno could even aim her rifle, it was upon them. Sren, the Tlon, reacted instantly. He hurled a rock at the creature's head, forcing it to veer off course. But the predator was relentless. It snapped at Zek, who barely dodged in time, but its claws raked across his arm, drawing a scream from him. Juno's mind raced. This was no simulation. They weren't being tested on tactics or strategy, this was real. A fight for survival. "Zek!" Juno shouted, watching in horror as the creature bore down on him. "Kova, cover him!" Kova hesitated, his eyes wide with panic. The Isha was strong, but not accustomed to violence. Still, he raised his weapon and fired. The blast hit the creature square in the side, but it didn't slow down. "Damn it," Juno cursed under her breath. She adjusted her aim, her hands steady despite the chaos. The predator was almost on top of Zek. Her heart slammed against her ribcage as she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and the creature stumbled back, a smoking hole in its side. It roared in pain, its eyes flashing with fury, but Juno didn't hesitate. Another shot. This time, the creature crumpled to the ground, its massive body twitching once before it lay still. The silence that followed was suffocating. Zek was on the ground, clutching his bleeding arm, his face pale. Kova rushed to his side, checking the wound. "He's losing a lot of blood," Kova said, panic rising in his voice. "We need to stop the bleeding." Juno dropped to her knees beside Zek, pulling out her medical pack. "Stay with me," she said firmly, even as her hands worked quickly. She applied pressure to the wound, wrapping it with a bandage she had practiced using many times in training, but the reality of the situation felt different. Sren stood back, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "We lost time," he said flatly. "You risked everything for him. It's a distraction." Juno looked up at him, her heart pounding. "We don't leave anyone behind," she snapped. "If we don't stick together, we won't make it." Sren didn't answer. He just turned, his focus returning to the horizon as if the threat had already passed. Zek's breath came in ragged gasps, but the bleeding slowed. "I'll be fine," he muttered, looking up at Juno with gratitude. "Thanks." Juno nodded but didn't take her eyes off Sren. He didn't understand, not yet. She had no intention of losing anyone, but the weight of responsibility was heavy on her shoulders. They were all relying on her now. "Let's move," Juno said after a tense moment, standing up. "We don't have much time." The group set off again, but the tension had shifted. Every noise in the jungle now seemed like an impending threat. The creature's attack had rattled everyone, even Sren, though he hid it well. Juno's mind raced with thoughts of the challenge ahead. It was clear now that the exam wasn't just about surviving the environment. It was about surviving each other. "Stay focused," Juno said, her voice sharper than she intended. "We're stronger as a group. Don't forget that." But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sren's resistance to teamwork would be a problem. Xeril's words echoed in her mind, words that seemed to haunt her, "The human doesn't belong here." As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, they continued their trek through the jagged terrain, the first battle behind them but more surely ahead. There was no turning back now. Juno had made a decision to fight as a unit, and if that meant she had to drag her team across the finish line, she would. After all, in the face of a galaxy that saw humans as weak, Juno Skye was determined to prove they were anything but. The air was thick with tension as Juno's team trekked deeper into the treacherous wilderness. The once vibrant sky had faded into dull hues of orange and purple as the sun set behind the jagged peaks of Syphor's mountains. Their bodies were exhausted, and their minds, equally strained, were forced to focus on the mission ahead. The final checkpoint was close, just a few more miles, and they would finally reach the relative safety of the ridge where they would receive their next orders. But Juno knew that nothing in the academy was ever that simple. Zek, who had been quiet for the past few hours, suddenly stumbled, almost losing his balance. His injury had slowed him down, but his resolve remained firm. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Juno shot him a concerned glance, but she didn't slow down. "We keep moving." "You're not slowing us down, Zek." He nodded gratefully but didn't speak again. As they pressed forward, Sren stayed silent, his long strides taking him effortlessly over the rough terrain. Kova, the Isha, trailed behind, still clearly unsettled by the events of the day. He kept looking over his shoulder, as though expecting the predator to return. Despite Juno's assurances, it was obvious that the creature's attack had shaken him to his core. The weight of their situation began to settle in for Juno. The predator they'd fought wasn't just a random test, it was a reminder of the unforgiving nature of Syphor. This wasn't just about surviving cadets or alien creatures. This was about their own mental and physical limits, about how much they could endure before everything fell apart. At the edge of her vision, Juno spotted movement. A shimmer in the air that wasn't just a trick of the dying light. "Incoming," she hissed, dropping to a crouch. The others did the same, instinctively. But nothing happened. The air remained still, and no creature appeared. Juno's heart was pounding in her ears, but she forced herself to take steady breaths. "It's a trap," she whispered. Srenna's voice was calm, as usual. "It could be nothing." "It's never nothing," Juno snapped, her hand on her rifle, her body coiled like a spring. "Stay alert." The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then, a screech, a horrifying, high-pitched sound that pierced the quiet of the wilderness. The noise seemed to echo from every direction at once. Before anyone could react, a barrage of spears, thick, jagged, and deadly, whizzed through the air, embedding themselves in the trees around them. "Ambush!" Kova shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The attack came from above. From the tree-line. Juno's instincts kicked in. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a spear that had been aimed directly at her head. Her rifle was in her hands in an instant, but she hesitated. Who was attacking them? Was this part of the exam? "Move," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Sren was already on his feet, charging forward with the Tlanes trademark speed. He threw himself into the thick foliage, disappearing into the underbrush, while Juno's team scrambled to follow. But something wasn't right. The way the attack was happening felt coordinated. Too precise. This was no random assault by some jungle creature. These attackers were cadets. Juno barely had time to react as the first of the enemy cadets jumped down from the trees. A lean, armored figure, their features concealed beneath a dark helmet, they lunged at her with a wicked curved blade in hand. Juno fired first. Her shot hit the cadet in the chest, but they were already diving out of the way. The force of the shot sent them sprawling, but they quickly regained their footing, snarling as they lunged again, faster this time. "Get down!" Juno yelled at her team. Zek was already on the ground, his injury making him sluggish, but Kova and Sren had fallen into a defensive position, weapons drawn. Juno quickly fired another shot, but this time it went wide as the enemy cadet ducked under it, their agility far surpassing anything Juno had expected. "We've got to stick together," Juno shouted, backing away slowly, keeping her rifle aimed at the enemy. "Don't break formation." But the cadets weren't listening. Zek, weak from his injury, had fallen behind, and Kova was hesitating again, frozen by fear. The tension in the air grew thicker as more of the attackers appeared, jumping from the trees, their weapons glinting in the fading light. Sren engaged the attackers with brutal force, his speed unmatched as he clashed with one of the cadets, knocking their weapon aside. He spun, driving the cadet to the ground. But it wasn't enough. Another attacker appeared behind him, raising a spear to strike. "No!" Juno screamed. Without thinking, she hurled herself toward Sren, slamming into him just as the spear struck. The force of the impact knocked them both to the ground. The spear missed by inches. "Get up!" Juno shouted, shoving him to his feet. Her heart was pounding in her ears. "Move!" They couldn't stay here. They had to move, or they would be overrun. Juno turned, scanning the battlefield. The attackers were closing in, forcing her team into a corner. She caught sight of the ridge, their destination. It was just ahead. They could make it if they moved now. "Run!" Juno shouted. The command broke through Kova's hesitation. He bolted forward, his webbed hands gripping his rifle tightly. Zek was slower, but he was still moving. Sren had already taken down another cadet, leaving their bodies sprawled on the ground as he rushed toward the ridge. They fought their way forward, using the terrain to their advantage, ducking behind rocks and boulders as the cadets continued to pursue them. The battle was chaotic, the sounds of weapons clashing and alien roars filling the air. But Juno didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the ridge, on the promise of safety. And then, it happened. They made it. They reached the ridge. The attackers hesitated at the base, unwilling to follow them into the final stretch. Juno's breath was ragged, but she allowed herself a moment to breathe. They had made it. For now. Srena's voice was sharp behind her. What was that? Why would cadets attack us? Juno didn't have an answer. All she knew was that the exam had just become far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. She glanced at her team, battered but alive. For the first time, she felt the weight of the situation settle in. They were in it together now. There was no turning back. We stay as one, Juno said quietly, her voice firm. We make it through this. Together.